Everyone thinks they know how people lose millions. Bad investments. Market crashes. Poor business decisions. But no one talks about how love can burn through $25 million faster than any wildfire, leaving nothing but ashes and 2 small children crying in the dark. Her name was Catherine Pierce. At 34, she was everything the world celebrated, a self-made CEO with a corner office that overlooked Manhattan, a penthouse that cost more per month than most people earned in a year, and a red Ferrari that turned heads on every street. But here's what the magazines never mentioned: the woman who had everything was about to lose it all because of the one person she trusted most. This is the story of how betrayal doesn't just break hearts. It destroys empires. Catherine's mornings used to start at 5:30 a.m. Not because she had to, but because she loved it. The city was still sleeping when she'd slip out of bed, careful not to wake Marcus, her husband of 8 years, or their 2 daughters, Emma, age 7, and little Sophia, just 4 years old. The penthouse was silent except for the soft hum of the espresso machine and the distant sound of early traffic 17 floors below. She'd stand by the floor-to-ceiling windows, coffee in hand, watching the sun paint the skyline in shades of gold and amber. This was her kingdom. Pierce Technologies wasn't just a company. It was her creation, built from a cramped studio apartment and a laptop she'd bought second-hand. 12 years of grinding, pitching, failing, and rising again. 12 years of proving everyone wrong. The company specialized in cybersecurity software for Fortune 500 companies. Boring? Maybe. Profitable? Extremely. $25 million in annual revenue, projected to hit $40 million by next year. Catherine had investors calling her weekly. Buyout offers landed in her inbox like love letters. She turned them all down. But every empire has a weak point. For Catherine, it wasn't her business acumen. It wasn't her strategy. It was the man sleeping in her bed. Marcus Pierce. Handsome. Charming. Always perfectly dressed in tailored suits that cost $3,000 each. He was the kind of man who knew exactly what to say at dinner parties, who made investors laugh, who played the role of supportive husband flawlessly. Catherine had met him at a tech conference 9 years ago. He'd been working in sales for a mid-tier software company, smooth-talking and ambitious. He pursued her relentlessly: flowers, handwritten notes, surprise weekend trips. She fell hard. What Catherine didn't know then, what she wouldn't discover until it was far too late, was that Marcus had been planning his own kind of investment from the very beginning. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday morning in March. Catherine was reviewing quarterly reports when her CFO, David Chen, knocked on her office door. His face was pale. "We need to talk," David said, closing the door behind him. "It's about the transfer." "What transfer?" Catherine looked up from her laptop. David placed a folder on her desk. Inside were bank statements. Wire transfers. Dates and amounts highlighted in yellow. 20 transactions over 6 months. Each one authorized by someone with executive access to the company accounts. $2 million. Gone. Catherine's hands went cold. Who authorized this? David's silence was louder than any answer. "Marcus," she whispered. Her husband had been added as a signatory to certain accounts 2 years ago. It was supposed to be a formality, something for emergencies, for when Catherine was traveling. She'd trusted him completely. Why wouldn't she? He was her husband. The father of her children. The man who'd held her when she cried after losing her mother. The man who'd promised to love her through everything. But love, it turns out, has a price. And for Marcus Pierce, that price was exactly $2 million. Catherine confronted him that night. The girls were asleep. The penthouse felt different suddenly, colder, like all the warmth had been sucked out through the vents. Marcus stood in the kitchen, pouring himself a glass of wine, acting like it was just another Tuesday. "We need to talk about the money," Catherine said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. Marcus turned slowly, and that's when she saw it, the look. Not guilt. Not panic. Something worse. Calculation. "Kath, baby, let me explain. $2 million, Marcus. Explain $2 million disappearing from my company accounts." He sighed, like she was being dramatic. Like she was the unreasonable one. "It was an investment. I was going to tell you." "An investment in what?" "A real estate opportunity. Vegas. It was time sensitive. I couldn't wait for board approval. You stole from my company." "I didn't steal. I'm your husband. What's yours is mine, remember? That's what marriage means." The audacity of it hit her like a physical blow. This man, the father of her children, the person she'd built a life with, was standing in their kitchen justifying theft with wedding vows. But here's what Catherine didn't know yet, what she wouldn't discover for another 3 weeks: the $2 million wasn't in Vegas. It wasn't in real estate. It was in the account of a 26-year-old woman named Amber Sinclair, who Marcus had been seeing for 18 months. The same woman who was now pregnant with his child. Some betrayals destroy you in one moment. Others unravel slowly, thread by thread, until you're left holding nothing but the memory of what you used to be. Catherine filed for divorce the next morning. She thought that would be the end of it, a clean break, a painful lesson, a chance to rebuild. She had her company. She had her daughters. She would survive this. But Marcus Pierce wasn't finished yet. Because a man who steals $2 million isn't the kind of man who walks away quietly. He's the kind of man who burns everything down on his way out. The lawsuit came first. Marcus claimed he was entitled to half of Pierce Technologies. His lawyers argued he'd been an integral part of the company's success. They pointed to his networking, his presence at investor meetings, his advisory role. It was fiction, but it was expensive fiction. Legal fees started piling up, $50,000, then $100,000, then more. Then came the allegations. Marcus claimed Catherine was an unfit mother. That she worked too much. That she neglected the girls. That Emma had anxiety and Sophia cried every night. He wanted full custody, he said, because he actually cared about their well-being. Catherine's world was collapsing, but she fought back. She hired the best lawyers money could buy. She documented everything. She was going to win this. She had to. But while Catherine was fighting Marcus in court, she missed what was happening inside her own company. Marcus had access to more than just bank accounts. He had passwords, email records, client contacts. And during his 18 months with Amber, he'd been quietly feeding proprietary information to one of Pierce Technologies' biggest competitors. Source code, client lists, pricing strategies. Everything that made Catherine's company valuable. The clients started leaving in August. First 1, then 3, then 7. Companies that had been with Pierce Technologies for years suddenly switched to a competitor, a company that somehow knew exactly how to undercut Catherine's pricing, exactly which features to offer, exactly what each client needed. Revenue dropped 20% in one quarter. Then 35%. Investors got nervous. The buyout offers stopped coming. Catherine was burning through cash reserves fighting legal battles while watching her company bleed out. She'd wake up at 3 a.m. in cold sweats, checking her phone, reading emails from worried employees, watching her life's work crumble. Emma started having nightmares. Sophia stopped talking at preschool. And Marcus? Marcus posted photos on social media from a beach resort in Mexico, Amber's pregnant belly visible in the frame, both of them smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. This is what they don't tell you about betrayal. It's not just the initial wound. It's the infection that spreads afterward, poisoning everything it touches. By December, Catherine had spent $4 million on legal fees. The company was surviving, but barely. She'd had to lay off 30% of her staff, people who'd believed in her, who'd helped build Pierce Technologies from nothing. She had to look them in the eyes and tell them there was no money left for their salaries. The penthouse was gone. Sold to cover expenses. The Ferrari, gone. Her savings account, drained. She moved into a smaller apartment in Brooklyn with the girls, a two-bedroom place that felt like a closet compared to what they'd lost. Emma kept asking when they could go back home. Catherine didn't have an answer. But the worst was still coming. Because in February, exactly 11 months after Catherine discovered the first theft, the final blow landed. Pierce Technologies declared bankruptcy. $25 million. 12 years of work. Hundreds of employees. Thousands of clients. All of it, gone. The bankruptcy proceedings were brutal. Catherine lost everything, the company, the remaining assets, even her reputation. Business articles called it a spectacular failure. Investors who'd once courted her now wouldn't return her calls. The woman who'd been featured in Forbes and Fortune was now just another cautionary tale about overexpansion and poor judgment. Marcus walked away clean. His lawyers had protected him. The divorce settlement gave him almost nothing, because by the time it was finalized, there was nothing left to take. He'd already taken it all. Ready for part 2? The descent from bankruptcy to the streets begins. Catherine still has her daughters. She still has her dignity. But she's about to learn that losing money is just the beginning. Sometimes you lose everything else too. The thing about falling from the top is that you pass through every level on the way down. And each level has its own special kind of humiliation waiting for you. Catherine Pierce learned this lesson slowly, painfully, one degrading moment at a time. The bankruptcy was finalized in March. By April, she'd lost the Brooklyn apartment. The landlord didn't care about her story. Everyone had a story. He cared about rent, and Catherine hadn't paid in 2 months. The eviction notice came on a Tuesday. She had 72 hours to vacate. 72 hours to figure out where a broke, disgraced former CEO could take 2 young daughters. She called her brother first. Michael had always been there for her, or so she thought. But Michael's wife answered the phone, and Catherine could hear the hesitation in her voice before she even finished explaining the situation. "Catherine, you know we'd love to help, but we just don't have the space. And with Michael's job situation right now." The excuses poured out like rehearsed lines. "Maybe you could try a women's shelter. They have resources for situations like this." A women's shelter. Catherine Pierce, who'd once signed contracts worth millions, was being directed to a homeless shelter. She tried old friends next. College roommates. Former colleagues. People she'd helped over the years, jobs she'd provided, connections she'd made, loans she'd given that were never paid back. She called 12 people that week. 12 people who suddenly had very good reasons why they couldn't help. Too much going on. Renovating the guest room. Dealing with their own problems. The message was clear: success has many friends, but failure dies alone. By the time the 72 hours were up, Catherine had exactly one option left: her car, a 10-year-old Honda Civic she'd bought after selling the Ferrari. It was the only asset the bankruptcy court had let her keep. 4 doors, a trunk, and a back seat that would become home for 3 people. Emma was 7 and old enough to understand that something was terribly wrong. She'd stopped asking when they could go back home. Now she just watched her mother with these huge, frightened eyes that broke Catherine's heart every single day. Sophia, at 4 years old, cried constantly. She didn't understand why they were sleeping in the car, why they couldn't take baths, why they ate McDonald's for dinner 3 nights in a row until even that became too expensive. The first night in the car, Catherine parked in a Walmart parking lot in Queens. She'd read somewhere that Walmart allowed overnight parking. She pulled into the back corner, away from the lights, and tried to make it seem like an adventure. "We're camping," she told the girls with forced enthusiasm. "Isn't this exciting?" Emma stared at her. "Mom, we're in a parking lot." "I know, baby. Just for tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure something else out." But tomorrow came, and there was nothing to figure out. Catherine had $43 in her checking account. Her credit cards were maxed out. She'd applied for 27 jobs in 2 weeks, retail, restaurants, administrative assistant positions, anything, and received 0 callbacks. Turns out being a former CEO makes you unemployable for entry-level work. Too overqualified, they said. Too risky. What they meant was, too fallen. The car became their world. Catherine learned which parking lots were safest, which fast food restaurants had bathrooms they could use in the morning, which libraries let them sit for hours without asking questions. She kept the girls as clean as she could with baby wipes and bottled water. She washed their clothes in public restroom sinks after midnight. She tried desperately to maintain some semblance of normal. But normal was dying a little more each day. Emma's school called in May. Emma had been falling asleep in class. She was withdrawn, wouldn't participate in activities, spent lunch periods alone. The school counselor wanted to meet. Catherine knew what that meeting would lead to: questions about their living situation, calls to child services, her daughters taken away. She pulled Emma out of school. Told them they were moving out of state. It was easier than explaining that they were homeless. Without school, the days stretched endlessly. They'd spend mornings at the library, where Catherine would use the computers to search for jobs, apply for assistance programs, send emails to anyone who might help. The girls would read books, color with borrowed crayons, pretend they weren't the only kids there with a mother who smelled like she hadn't showered in days. Sophia's 4th birthday came in June. Catherine had saved $11 over 2 weeks. She bought a small cake from a discount bakery and $2 store presents, a stuffed unicorn and a coloring book. They celebrated in the car, parked behind a shopping center, singing "Happy Birthday," while other families walked by carrying bags full of things they'd never have to worry about affording. Sophia smiled, but it was a sad smile. The kind of smile that children shouldn't know how to make. "I wish we had a house again," she whispered while blowing out the single candle Catherine had stuck in the cake. "Me too, baby," Catherine said, pulling her close. "Me too." That night, after the girls finally fell asleep curled up in the back seat, Catherine sat in the driver's seat and allowed herself to cry. Silent, shaking sobs that she muffled with her hands so she wouldn't wake them. This wasn't supposed to be their life. Emma and Sophia were supposed to have everything: good schools, dance classes, birthday parties with dozens of friends, a future full of possibilities. Instead, they had a mother who'd failed them. A mother who'd trusted the wrong person and lost everything. A mother who couldn't even provide them with beds to sleep in. The guilt was suffocating. More painful than hunger, more exhausting than sleepless nights in the car, more devastating than anything Marcus had done. Because at the end of the day, Catherine had chosen him. She'd let him into their lives. She'd given him access to everything. This was her fault. Summer brought new challenges. The car became unbearably hot during the day. Catherine couldn't run the air conditioning without the engine on, and gas was expensive. They'd sit in the library until closing time, then drive to whatever parking lot felt safest that night. Catherine would crack the windows just enough for air but not enough for danger. She'd lie awake listening to every sound, terrified of who might approach the car, what might happen to her daughters. In July, a security guard knocked on the window at 2 a.m. They were parked behind a grocery store. Catherine jolted awake, her heart hammering. "You can't sleep here," the guard said, shining a flashlight into the car. Emma and Sophia stirred in the back seat, squinting against the light. "Please," Catherine begged. "Just for tonight. We have nowhere else. I have to call the police if you don't leave. Store policy." So they drove. At 2 a.m., with 2 exhausted children and a gas tank that was nearly empty, they drove until they found another parking lot, another temporary refuge that would last until someone else told them to leave. This became the pattern. Move every few nights. Never stay anywhere long enough to be noticed. Never make eye contact with people who might ask questions. Never admit to anyone what had become of them. Catherine tried to shield the girls from the worst of it, but some things couldn't be hidden. They were hungry. Not the kind of hungry that goes away after a snack, but the deep, constant hunger that makes your stomach hurt and your head spin. Catherine would buy cheap food, crackers, peanut butter, apples when she could afford them, and give most of her portion to Emma and Sophia. She told them she wasn't hungry, that she'd eaten earlier. They believed her because children want to believe their mothers have everything under control. But Catherine was starving. Physically and emotionally. She'd lost 28 pounds since the bankruptcy. Her clothes hung off her frame. Her hair, which she'd once kept salon perfect, was now a mess she tied back with a rubber band. Her face, once photographed for magazine covers, was gaunt and lined with stress that made her look 10 years older. And the worst part? Sometimes, late at night, she'd see families through restaurant windows. Mother, father, kids, all laughing over dinner. The kind of ordinary moment she'd taken for granted for years. The kind of moment that now felt like a luxury from another lifetime. She'd watch them and wonder, did Marcus ever think about what he'd done? Did he care that his daughters were sleeping in a car? Did he lose even one night of sleep knowing that Emma was developing anxiety and Sophia had nightmares? Or was he too busy with Amber and their new baby, living whatever life he'd built with Catherine's money, to remember the family he'd destroyed? In August, the car broke down. The engine just gave up, steam pouring from under the hood on a sweltering afternoon in a McDonald's parking lot. Catherine stood there, staring at the dead vehicle that had been their only shelter, and felt something break inside her that was even more fundamental than hope. A mechanic quoted her $1,200 for repairs. She had $67 to her name. The car was towed to an impound lot. Catherine couldn't afford to get it back. Just like that, they lost their last piece of security. Their home, their transportation, their safety, gone. That night, Catherine and her daughters slept on a bench in a public park. Emma held Sophia, and Catherine held them both, her arms wrapped around them like she could protect them from everything that had already happened and everything still to come. "Mom?" Emma whispered in the darkness. "Are we going to be okay?" Catherine wanted to say yes. She wanted to promise that everything would work out, that this was temporary, that better days were coming. But the words stuck in her throat because she didn't believe them anymore. "I don't know, baby," she finally whispered back. "I really don't know." By September, they'd been on the streets for 5 months. Catherine knew every shelter in the city now, which ones had space, which ones were safe, which ones would take families. But the waiting lists were months long, and the temporary shelters could only keep them for a few days at a time. They bounced from place to place. A church basement here, a community center there, back to park benches when there was nowhere else. Catherine watched her daughters become harder, quieter, more withdrawn. The light was going out of their eyes, replaced by a wariness that no child should ever have to develop. Sophia stopped talking altogether for 2 weeks in October. Just went completely silent, like she'd decided there was nothing left worth saying. Catherine took her to a free clinic, terrified something was medically wrong. The doctor examined her and then pulled Catherine aside. "There's nothing physically wrong with your daughter," he said gently. "But she's experiencing severe trauma. Children her age shouldn't have this level of stress. She needs stability, routine, safety. She needs a home." Catherine nodded, unable to speak, because she knew. Of course she knew. But knowing and being able to fix it were two entirely different things. That night, lying on cots in an overcrowded shelter, listening to dozens of other people's nightmares and snores and desperate prayers, Catherine finally admitted the truth she'd been avoiding for months. She had failed. Completely, utterly, irreversibly failed. She'd lost the company. She'd lost the money. She'd lost her reputation, her friends, her family's support. But the worst part, the part that was killing her slowly, was that she was losing her daughters too. Not physically, but in every other way that mattered. She was watching them fade, watching their childhood disappear, watching them turn into tiny versions of all the broken people who surrounded them in shelters and soup kitchens and welfare lines. And there was nothing she could do to stop it. Ready for part 3? Winter is coming. The streets get colder. The choices get harder. And Catherine is about to learn that when you think you've hit rock bottom, there's always somewhere lower to fall. November brought the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and never leaves. The kind of cold that makes you understand why people die on the streets, not because they're weak, but because the city becomes actively hostile to anyone without walls and heat. Catherine learned to fear weather reports. Every forecast for freezing temperatures sent panic through her chest. Where would they sleep? How would she keep the girls warm? She had 2 thin blankets donated from a shelter and the clothes on their backs. That was it. The first snow fell on November 8th. Catherine watched the flakes drift down from the overhang of a closed storefront where they'd taken shelter, and felt something close to despair. Emma and Sophia were huddled against her, shivering despite being wrapped in both blankets. Their lips had a bluish tint. Their small bodies trembled constantly. "I'm cold, Mommy," Sophia whispered. It was one of the few things she'd said in weeks. "I know, sweetheart. I know." But knowing didn't warm them. Nothing warmed them. They tried the shelters that night, but every single one was full. Capacity reached. Fire code limitations. Come back tomorrow. The rejections came with apologetic looks from workers who'd seen too many freezing families to let it break them anymore. Catherine wanted to scream at them, to beg, to demand they make space. But she just nodded and moved on to the next place. And the next. And the next. By midnight, they'd been turned away from 7 different shelters. The snow was falling harder now, accumulating on the sidewalks in wet, heavy clumps. Catherine's feet were numb in her worn-out sneakers, the only shoes she owned. Emma's teeth were chattering so hard Catherine could hear it. Sophia had stopped shivering, which Catherine knew was actually worse. The body stops shivering when hypothermia sets in. They found a subway station that stayed open all night. Catherine led her daughters down into the underground warmth, and they huddled on a bench on the platform. At least it was out of the snow. At least the air wasn't quite as cutting. But the subway had rules. Security guards patrolled regularly, moving along anyone who looked like they were staying too long. Every hour, Catherine would have to wake the girls, move to a different bench, pretend they were waiting for a train. Then wait 20 minutes and come back. An endless shuffle through the night, never truly resting, never truly warm, just slightly less frozen than they'd be above ground. Other people filled the station, the city's invisible population, the ones everyone pretends not to see. An old man with a shopping cart full of aluminum cans. A woman who talked to herself in 3 different voices. A teenage boy with track marks on his arms, nodding off against a pillar. And families like Catherine's, mothers with children, fathers with hollow eyes, people who used to be someone before the city chewed them up and spit them out. This was Catherine's world now. Not boardrooms and business deals. Not strategy meetings and investor presentations. Just survival. Hour by hour. Day by day. Trying to keep 2 little girls alive in a city that had no use for them anymore. December was worse. The temperatures dropped into the teens at night. Catherine developed a persistent cough that wouldn't go away, deep, wet, painful. She knew it was probably bronchitis or pneumonia, but she couldn't afford a doctor. She couldn't afford anything. The $67 she'd had in August was long gone. Now she had nothing. Literally nothing. They ate at soup kitchens when they could find them. Church basements that served meals twice a week. Community centers with food banks. The meals were the same: weak soup, stale bread, sometimes a piece of fruit if they were lucky. Emma and Sophia would eat mechanically, without joy, just fuel to keep going. They'd stopped complaining about being hungry months ago. Now they just accepted it as a permanent condition. Catherine watched her daughters waste away. Emma, at 7, should have been growing, full of energy. Instead, she was rail-thin, her cheekbones too prominent, her eyes too large in her face. She'd stopped playing, stopped laughing, stopped acting like a child. She just existed, moving through each day with the exhausted resignation of someone 3 times her age. Sophia's 5th birthday came on December 19th. Catherine had nothing to give her. No cake, no presents, no celebration. They were staying in a shelter that night, one of the rare nights they got a bed, and Catherine tried to make it special by singing "Happy Birthday" before lights out. Sophia didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just stared at the ceiling with empty eyes. "I don't want to have birthdays anymore," she whispered. Catherine's heart shattered into pieces so small she didn't think they could ever be put back together. Christmas made it worse. The whole city transformed into a celebration of everything Catherine's daughters didn't have. Decorations in store windows. Families carrying shopping bags full of presents. Children laughing, excited, believing in magic and Santa and goodness. Emma and Sophia pressed their faces against store windows, watching toy displays with expressions that were too mature, too knowing. They understood they weren't part of that world anymore. They'd never write letters to Santa again, never wake up to presents under a tree, never experience the simple joy of childhood during the holidays. On Christmas Eve, a church gave out donated gifts to homeless families. Emma received a used doll with matted hair. Sophia got a stuffed animal that smelled like mildew. They said thank you politely, like Catherine had taught them, but they didn't play with the gifts. They just held them and stared, these tangible reminders of how far they'd fallen. That night, Catherine lay awake on a cot in a shelter, listening to her daughters breathe. The cough in her chest had gotten worse. Every breath hurt. She was burning up with fever, but she couldn't rest, couldn't stop, couldn't give in. Because if she gave in, who would protect Emma and Sophia? She thought about Marcus. For the first time in months, she let herself really think about him. Wonder where he was tonight. Probably in a warm house with Amber and their baby. Probably exchanging expensive gifts. Probably not thinking about the family he'd destroyed. The hatred she'd felt for him had burned out months ago, replaced by something colder and more devastating, the knowledge that evil often wins. That bad people frequently get away with it. That justice is a fairy tale they tell children to help them sleep at night. Marcus had committed fraud, theft, corporate espionage. He'd manipulated, lied, betrayed. And his punishment? He'd gotten away clean. While Catherine and her daughters froze on the streets, Marcus was warm and safe and probably happy. There was no justice in that. No fairness. No cosmic balance. Just the raw truth that sometimes monsters win and innocents suffer. January brought a breaking point. Catherine's cough had turned into full-blown pneumonia. She could barely walk without getting dizzy. Her fever spiked to dangerous levels. But she kept going because stopping meant her daughters would be taken by child services. Stopping meant admitting defeat. On January 14th, Catherine collapsed on a sidewalk in Brooklyn. Just fell to her knees, unable to get air, her vision going dark at the edges. Emma screamed for help. Sophia started crying, actual tears, the first Catherine had seen from her in months. Someone called 911. An ambulance came. Catherine was dimly aware of being loaded onto a stretcher, of paramedics asking her questions she couldn't answer, of Emma's terrified face staring at her through the ambulance window. "My daughters," she managed to gasp. "Don't leave my daughters." But they did. They had to. Paramedics aren't social workers. 2 police officers stayed with Emma and Sophia on the sidewalk, calling Child Protective Services, while Catherine was rushed to the hospital. She spent 4 days in the hospital. Severe pneumonia, malnutrition, dehydration. The doctors kept her sedated, pumped full of antibiotics and fluids. When she finally woke up, clear-headed for the first time in weeks, the first thing she asked about was her daughters. The social worker who came to her bedside had kind eyes but delivered the news without mercy: "Your daughters are in emergency foster care. Given your living situation and medical condition, the state has determined they're not safe in your custody." No. Catherine tried to sit up, but her body wouldn't cooperate. "No, you can't take them. They need me. Ms. Pierce, you were living on the streets. Your children were malnourished, suffering from exposure. You nearly died. This is for their protection. I can get a job. I can find housing. Please, just give me a chance. The state is filing for temporary custody. There'll be a hearing in 6 weeks. Until then, Emma and Sophia will remain in foster care." Catherine screamed. Actually screamed, a sound of pure anguish that brought nurses running. They sedated her again, and when she woke up, the social worker was gone and the reality remained: her daughters had been taken from her. She was released from the hospital 3 days later with nowhere to go. The hospital social worker gave her a list of resources: shelters, food banks, employment services, like she hadn't already exhausted every option on that list a dozen times. Catherine took the papers and walked out into the January cold. For the first time in her life, she was completely alone. No husband. No daughters. No family or friends who cared. No company. No money. No home. Nothing. She wandered the streets that night without purpose. She could have gone to a shelter, but what was the point? She'd failed at everything that mattered. Failed as a CEO. Failed as a wife. Failed as a mother. What was left? She found herself on a bridge in the early hours of the morning. The water below was black and frozen at the edges. It would be so easy to just step over the railing. To let the cold take her. To stop fighting a battle she'd already lost. Catherine stood there for 2 hours, staring at the water, feeling nothing. Not sadness. Not fear. Just a vast, empty numbness where her life used to be. In the end, she didn't jump. Not because she had hope, hope had died months ago. She didn't jump because even in her broken state, even destroyed beyond recognition, some tiny part of her refused to give Marcus that final victory. He'd taken everything else. He didn't get to take her life too. So Catherine walked away from the bridge. Found a shelter. Got a cot for the night. And lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering what survival even meant anymore when everything worth living for was gone. February brought the custody hearing. Catherine showed up in borrowed clothes that didn't fit, her hair clean for the first time in weeks thanks to the shelter's facilities. She sat in family court and listened to a lawyer she couldn't afford argue why she should lose her children permanently. The state's case was simple: Catherine was homeless, unemployed, had no support system, and no prospects for improvement. She couldn't provide basic necessities. Emma and Sophia had thrived in foster care, regular meals, warm beds, stability. Taking them away from that would be cruel. Catherine wanted to argue. Wanted to scream that she'd built a $25 million company from nothing, that she was smart and capable and just needed one chance. But the judge looked at her with pity, and Catherine understood, it didn't matter who she used to be. It only mattered who she was now, a broken woman who'd failed at everything. The judge gave her supervised visitation rights. 1 hour per week, in a state facility, with a social worker present. That was all she got. 1 hour per week with the daughters she'd carried for 9 months each, nursed, raised, loved more than her own life. The first visit happened 3 days later. Catherine sat in a sterile room with plastic toys and waited for Emma and Sophia to arrive. When the door opened and she saw them, her heart nearly stopped. They looked different. Clean. Well-fed. Emma had gained weight, her cheeks fuller. Sophia's eyes were brighter. They were wearing new clothes, actual new clothes that fit properly. Their hair was brushed and styled. They looked healthy. They looked cared for. They looked like Catherine hadn't been able to make them look in over a year. "Mommy." Sophia ran to her, and Catherine caught her, holding her tight, breathing in the smell of children's shampoo and laundry detergent. Emma hung back, more cautious. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, baby. God, I missed you. I missed you both so much." They spent the hour talking, or trying to. The social worker sat in the corner, taking notes on every interaction. Emma told her about her new school. Sophia showed her a drawing she'd made. They seemed okay. Better than okay. They seemed like they were healing from everything Catherine had put them through. And that realization hurt worse than anything Marcus had ever done. Her daughters were better off without her. The state was right. The foster family was right. Everyone was right except Catherine, who destroyed 3 lives because she'd been stupid enough to trust the wrong man. When the hour ended, Sophia cried. "I want to stay with you, Mommy." "I know, baby. But you can't. Not yet. When can we come home?" Catherine looked at the social worker, who shook her head slightly. There was no home to come back to. There might never be again. "Soon," Catherine lied. "Soon, sweetheart." She watched them leave, holding hands with the social worker, and something inside Catherine finally, completely broke. Ready for part 4? The final descent. Where Catherine faces the ultimate truth about betrayal, loss, and what's left when everything is gone. No hope. No redemption. Just the brutal reality of a woman who lost everything and will never get it back. March came with rain that felt personal, like the city itself was crying for everyone who'd been broken by it. Catherine sat under a bus stop shelter, watching water pour from the sky, and realized she'd been homeless for exactly 1 year. 12 months since the eviction. 12 months of hell that felt like a lifetime. She was 35 years old and looked 50. Her hair, once professionally highlighted and styled, hung in greasy strands. Her skin was gray from malnutrition and lack of sunlight. Her teeth, one of them had fallen out last month, just came loose and dropped into her hand while she was eating stale bread. No dentist. No way to fix it. Just another piece of her that was dying. The weekly visits with Emma and Sophia continued, but they got harder each time. Not because the girls were suffering, but because they weren't. They were thriving. Emma had made friends at her new school. Sophia was talking again, full sentences, stories about her day. They drew pictures of their foster family, a nice house with a yard, a dog named Buddy, bedrooms with actual beds. "Our foster mom makes pancakes on Sundays," Emma told Catherine during one visit, her voice bright with an enthusiasm that used to be reserved for Catherine. "And they're really good, with chocolate chips." Catherine smiled and nodded and felt something die inside her. Because that's what good mothers did, they made pancakes on Sunday mornings. They provided warm beds and dogs and stability. They didn't drag their children through a year of hell because they'd been stupid enough to trust a man who saw them as nothing but a bank account to drain. The social worker pulled Catherine aside after that visit. "The foster family wants to adopt," she said quietly. "Emma and Sophia are attached. They're doing well. The state thinks permanent placement would be in their best interest. You're taking them away from me. Forever. You're taking yourself away from them, Ms. Pierce. You have no home. No income. No prospects. What kind of life can you offer them? More shelters? More hunger? More trauma?" Catherine had no answer. Because the social worker was right. That's what made it so devastating. Everyone who was destroying her life was technically correct. She couldn't provide for her daughters. She was unemployable. She had no prospects. The best thing for Emma and Sophia was to forget she existed and build new lives with people who could actually take care of them. April brought a new low. Catherine was attacked in a shelter, another homeless woman who thought Catherine had stolen her belongings. The woman hit her with a metal water bottle, splitting Catherine's eyebrow open. Blood poured down her face, but Catherine didn't fight back. She just let it happen. Let the pain come. She almost welcomed it because physical pain was easier to handle than the emotional devastation of losing her children. Security broke up the fight. Catherine got stitches at a free clinic. She looked in the mirror afterward and didn't recognize the face staring back. This wasn't Catherine Pierce, former CEO. This wasn't the woman who'd graced magazine covers. This was a broken shell, a cautionary tale, a reminder that the fall from grace isn't poetic, it's just brutal and slow and utterly complete. The adoption hearing was scheduled for June. Catherine received the notice at a shelter and stared at the paper for hours. In 6 weeks, a judge would legally sever her parental rights. Emma and Sophia would become someone else's daughters. The Pierce family, what was left of it, would cease to exist. Catherine thought about not showing up. Just letting it happen without fighting. What was the point of prolonging the inevitable? But she went anyway, because even destroyed, even hopeless, some part of her needed to look her daughters in the eye one last time as their mother. The hearing lasted 40 minutes. The foster parents spoke about how much they loved Emma and Sophia, how the girls had blossomed in their care, how they wanted to provide them with a permanent, stable home. The social worker presented evidence of Catherine's continued homelessness, her lack of employment, her deteriorating mental and physical health. Catherine's court-appointed lawyer tried. He really did. Talked about extenuating circumstances, about the fraud committed against her, about how she'd been a victim too. But the judge wasn't interested in Catherine's story. He was interested in what was best for two young girls. Emma and Sophia sat in the front row with their foster parents. They looked beautiful, healthy, clean, wearing nice dresses. They held hands with the people who would become their new parents and didn't look at Catherine once. "Ms. Pierce," the judge said, his voice not unkind but firm. "I don't doubt that you love your daughters. But love isn't enough. These children need stability, security, and a home. You cannot provide those things. In the best interest of Emma and Sophia Pierce, I'm granting the petition for adoption. Your parental rights are hereby terminated." The gavel came down. Just like that. 1 year of fighting, 1 year of surviving, 1 year of holding on to the hope that somehow she'd get her daughters back, all of it ended with a single wooden sound. Catherine sat there, numb, as people stood and gathered their things. The foster parents, the new parents, hugged Emma and Sophia, tears of joy streaming down their faces. Other people in the courtroom smiled, happy that 2 little girls would have a good life. And Catherine? Catherine felt absolutely nothing. The pain had gone so deep it had burned out completely, leaving only emptiness. She stood to leave, and that's when Emma looked at her. Really looked at her. And for just a second, Catherine saw something in her daughter's eyes, confusion, maybe guilt, maybe just the fading memory of who Catherine used to be. "Goodbye, Emma," Catherine whispered, knowing her daughter was too far away to hear. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Then she walked out of the courthouse and into the rain, and no one stopped her. No one followed. She was just another broken person the system had processed and discarded, another failure the city would forget by tomorrow. June turned to July. Catherine stopped counting days. Time became meaningless when you had nothing to measure it against. She drifted through the city like a ghost, sleeping wherever she ended up, eating whatever she could find or afford from the few dollars she occasionally got from panhandling. She saw Marcus once. Pure chance, she was walking past a cafe in Manhattan, and there he was, sitting at an outdoor table. He looked good. Tan, fit, well-dressed. Laughing with Amber, who held their baby in her arms. A perfect family, enjoying an expensive brunch on a beautiful summer day. Marcus didn't see Catherine. Why would he? She looked nothing like the woman he'd married. She was invisible now, just another homeless person that people looked through without seeing. Catherine stood there and watched them for 5 minutes. Watched Marcus play with his baby. Watched Amber smile at him like he was a good man, a trustworthy man. Watched them exist in their bubble of happiness, completely untouched by the destruction they'd caused. And Catherine felt nothing. Not hatred. Not anger. Not even sadness. Just a vast, oceanic emptiness. Because this was the real lesson, the one no one wanted to learn: sometimes evil wins. Sometimes bad people get everything they want while good people lose everything. Sometimes there's no justice, no karma, no cosmic balance. Sometimes betrayal just wins. Marcus would never face consequences. He'd stolen millions, destroyed lives, and walked away clean. He'd sleep well tonight. He'd probably sleep well every night for the rest of his life. While Catherine would sleep in a shelter, and Emma and Sophia would grow up calling someone else a mom, and $25 million worth of dreams would remain ashes. That was the truth. The brutal, unforgiving truth that no one wanted to acknowledge. September brought Catherine's 36th birthday. No one knew. No one cared. She spent it in line at a food bank, waiting for a meal she didn't even want to eat. The woman in front of her was talking about her granddaughter's upcoming wedding. The man behind her was complaining about the heat. And Catherine was just existing. Taking up space. Breathing air. For no particular reason except that stopping seemed harder than continuing. October brought the first cold snap of the coming winter. Catherine felt it in her bones, the warning of another brutal season ahead. Her body was weaker now. The pneumonia had damaged her lungs. She got sick easily, recovered slowly. Another winter on the streets might kill her. Part of her didn't care. She saw Emma and Sophia one last time in early November, not at a scheduled visit, but by accident. She was panhandling on a street corner when they walked past with their new parents. Emma was wearing a school uniform, carrying a backpack, laughing at something her new father said. Sophia was holding her new mother's hand, skipping along the sidewalk. They looked happy. Genuinely, completely happy. Like the year they'd spent homeless was just a bad dream they'd forgotten. Catherine didn't call out to them. Didn't try to get their attention. What would be the point? She wasn't their mother anymore. Legally, officially, she was no one to them. Just another homeless person on a street corner that people looked through without seeing. She watched them until they turned a corner and disappeared, and then she kept sitting there, holding out her cup, hoping for spare change from strangers who would never know that the woman begging for quarters had once signed contracts worth millions. This was her life now. This was her forever. No redemption arc. No inspiring comeback. No justice. Just the slow, grinding reality of being broken and staying broken. People always want to believe that suffering has meaning, that rock bottom is just a launching point for rising again. But sometimes rock bottom is just where you live now. Sometimes you don't rise. Sometimes betrayal takes everything and you never get it back. Catherine Pierce had learned that lesson. It cost her $25 million, 2 daughters, and every shred of dignity she'd ever possessed. But she'd learned it thoroughly, completely, in a way she'd never forget. Love can destroy faster than any market crash. Trust can cost more than any failed investment. And sometimes, the person sleeping next to you is the one planning your destruction. That was the truth. The ugly, unromantic, devastating truth. And Catherine would carry it with her for the rest of her life, however long that life lasted, on whatever street corner she ended up begging on, in whatever shelter she managed to get a bed in. Because betrayal didn't just take her money. It didn't just take her daughters. It took her future. It took every possibility of anything better. It took hope itself. And some things, once taken, can never be given back.